Great. So if everybody could push continue, that just allows us to record. And this will be again on HHRF's YouTube channel. So take a look at this again, or also please feel free to view the previous webinars. So again, I am Tara Mahoney. I am on the education committee here. I'm the CEO of Equine Immersion Project. We do trauma counseling for military, first aid, first responders, veterans and their families and supports. So I am super excited to learn from Nancy and Molly tonight and hear what these two incredibly talented and dedicated professionals have contributed to the equine-assisted services industry. So Molly, we're going to go to the next slide, and here is your very impressive bio. As people read the bio, it was one thing that I thought would be kind of interesting just to have a conversation so they can kind of get to know you is, how did you really get started in this work?
Well, I want to say hello to everyone that's on the call tonight. And I think my claim to fame would be when I was in college and working at Michigan State and was asked to go work on a big production horse farm, I found a place called Green Chimneys, and it's a treatment program out in New York that does a lot with animal-assisted interactions. And in 1987, I say back when the earth was cooling, I was an intern and I lived behind the kindergarten classroom for 6 months, and I learned all I could from Dr. Ross, Sam Ross, Dr. Rollo, and the rest is history. I kept continuing knocking on doors and finding mentors in this field until I went and got my master's and came to Minnesota because that was very active at the time in pet partners and starting animal-assisted therapy. So I'm thrilled to be here and hope to learn from all of you as you learn from us too.
Thanks, Molly. And now we'll go to Nancy's slide here. Also, again, another full and amazing bio. Nancy, you have such an interesting journey that has kind of led you through this really as one of the pioneers starting EFMA. If you could kind of tell us a little bit about your story so we could get to know you better.
I don't know where to start. Well, actually, what hooked me was an adolescent girl who I really adored, who was in treatment, in individual treatment, and she was a wild child, and we couldn't get to her. And one day she said, "You know, I have this horse that an abused horse, and I don't know who's helping who. The horse is helping me, or I'm helping the horse. But maybe you better come out to the barn." And then at this time, I was just working in an office, and I thought, well, that would be fun. So I went out to the barn, and I just sat with this girl and her horse for an hour, and I was astonished. This wild child who could not sit still, who could not stay in school, who was constantly getting into trouble, had turned into a sweet, wise, compassionate, loving being who was interacting with a four-legged person with the same kind of qualities. And I just sat with him. It was the most peaceful, beautiful interaction I had ever seen. And I thought, that's interesting. And I had never heard of equine facilitated anything at that point. But I was really impressed. So some years later, when Barbara Dowdy in Maine called me one day, and she ran a PATH center, and she said, "You know, I'm starting a program for abused women with horses, but I need a mental health person. Could you just come over?" And I was so tired. I was one of those weeks when I'd worked too many hours, and it was too tired to say no. So I got in the car and I went over to the barn, and I sort of absentmindedly opened the doors to the barn, and there was a little fjord whose name was Fia in the cross ties looking at me, and my heart melted. I just remembered how much I loved horses and how absolutely wonderful they smelled. And so I started working with her, and the next thing I knew, all my patients wanted to come to the barn and work in the barn. They didn't want to come to the office anymore. And so that was how it all started.
That's
then
fantastic, Nancy. We hear that, I think everybody in the industry, experiences that aromatherapy of the
right,
barn, right? Yep. And it is funny, people never took a selfie with themselves with me in the office, but as soon as they get on the farm, everybody's taking pictures with the horse. So nobody sits on my couch and takes a selfie. So totally agree. Well, let me let this hand this over to you guys because really we're so excited to start the slides and start your presentation. And I'm just going to kind of step back and let Nancy and Molly do their thing. So everybody enjoy. Send any questions you have through the chat, and let's hear from you guys.
So I'll just invite you to pull up your popcorn and your sodas and sit back, and we're going to try to do a little bit of a fireside chat. And Nancy and I'll kind of talk back and forth. And so, Nancy, I'll just say to you, how do you describe trauma, define it for yourself, and then I'll kind of jump in and do the same thing.
okay. So, so my working definition of trauma is something happens that totally overwhelms my normal coping mechanisms. And I go into, I mean, in the olden days, we would say into fight, flight, or freeze. And now we have more sophisticated knowledge about the vagal system. But basically, the body reacts to an event as if it's life-threatening. It feels life-threatening. And people often say, well, are there big traumas and little traumas? And or is it because an earthquake different from a sexual assault? And maybe Molly, why don't you speak to that?
You know, for me, the answer to that one, Nancy, is it depends, because it's a lot of how my nervous system responds to it. And so it's that perceived threat. And so often we find if people didn't have the support system at the time of a trauma, and the trauma gets locked into their body and there's not a way to process it, it can cause a traumatic response. And I don't even say response, I say reaction, because there's not a way that we respond. We just react to that giant,
right, sort of automatic,
that inability to act when you talk about, that automatic patterning. And I will just add too, and this I'm going to read just a little bit. This comes from a white paper that was published in 2004 by James Serpel, who was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and Kathy Kruger. And it was about adolescent therapy and does animals help? And so one of the things that myself and one of my colleagues and mentors, Dr. Maureen McNamara, talked about was that growing up in an environment that's perceived as unsafe or unpredictable or sometimes unreliable, you can result in a disorganized and dysregulated nervous system and brain functioning. And this damage can cause damage to the regulatory circuits when you talk about fight, flight, freeze. And they create situations in which the limbic system reacts. There can be the fight, flight, freeze. Sometimes people say fidget or faint. And that's the normal way that people start responding in their world. And for teenagers, it can result in aggression or hyperactivity, a dissociation, also for adults. And there's a host of other behaviors that can happen. And I'll talk a little bit more and talk about why horses when we go there. But it's that place where I think one of our colleagues would call it that we go out of that window of tolerance where we're in hyper arousal, where everything is the big startle, or we're in that hypo arousal of I'm fine. I call it the Minnesota arousal. I'm fine. We're great. It's good. It's interesting. But there's no affect and there's not access to that. And, I'm trained in sensorimotor psychotherapy, Nancy, and it's that way that people say, oh, I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad. And I'm like, where is that in your body? And when you start helping people come at it from a body-centered somatic perspective, you get a whole lot more information, and the body can release the trauma that's often beyond the ability of the cognitive brain to work with. So long answer to a short question, but that's kind of how I determine trauma.
So I think what you say about the body is so important, and also what you say about safety, um, which brings me to something we hadn't discussed when we were talking earlier, but the connection between having a safe, comfortable attachment in early childhood, and having a safe base is really important, because without that, we are dysregulated as children, and we're more prone to have a traumatic reaction to a stimulus. And so it makes us high risk for trauma.
I definitely agree with that. And I think sometimes trauma can be the norm, and people, if things are okay, often my trauma clients will look at me and go, this doesn't feel normal. When's the other shoe going to drop? Or how do I respond normally? Because the nervous system doesn't know what to do with calm, mindfulness, regulated. That can be scary too, because that's too new and unpredictable, just as trauma is. So
Right.
That's why I'm getting into the horse part, because I want to get there quicker, but that's,
Oh, yeah,
some
well,
of that.
we can go there and we can come back. Why don't you go there and talk about how do the horses help people who have experienced trauma?
Well, I think that the horses kind of can respond to human arousal or emotional states. And people will often say to me, the horses kind of mirror. And I don't necessarily think I agree with that. My horse, when I work with him, he attunes to the emotions of my clients. And often in trauma, you'll hear that word attunement. And if somebody's dysregulated, like, the horse will be like, what should we be worried about? And then if we can help the person say, okay, is there a way that you can come mindfully and feel your feet on the ground, and you can feel your nervous system start to calm, that horse will take an out breath, or they'll relax. And my clients are like, did I do that? And I'll say, well, I think the horse did it for themselves. But when you responded in that certain way, it helped the horse respond, and they can feel comfortable and calm too. And I apologize, there's a noise in the background because the printer's going off next to me, but please ignore the loud noise that's going to come for a moment. How about, Nancy, how about for you? How do you see the horse coming in?
Well, it's interesting about that the horse mirroring. I think we used to talk about that a lot. I think sometimes the horse attunes to something I am not conscious of that's going on in me. It happened with a client just a few days ago. Horse was running around outside the round pen. And the horse that we were working with inside the round pen was calm, cool, and collected with the client. And the horse that was outside the round pen, who was just there for company, was running back and forth and back and forth. And finally the client said, that's how I feel. So I think what was happening was that the horse outside the round pen was attuning to something that was going on inside the person that she wasn't quite conscious of yet. So sometimes that happens. But what I have so often experienced with people is that the horse co-regulates in all the wonderful ways that horses do, our energetic autonomic nervous system, and calms us down. And I will never forget the first time I did a veterans program with Ann Alden a decade ago or so. And it was in a PASS center in Arizona. And people said, now don't try to get these vets, this is a grief program. Don't get them crying. They're not going to cry. I said, okay. I mean, I don't try to make people cry. Well, don't you know, within 2 seconds being with the horses, everyone was weeping. And afterwards, one of the vets said to me, it was a Vietnam War vet who had been chronically anxious for years and years, medication. He said, I have never felt so calm. I have never felt this calm. And I was so struck by that because that really is what the horses do to us and for us.
Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing. The some of the content you shared about with clients. I just actually finished a 5-day training with Dr. Rebecca Bailey and Linda Kohanoff, and they were doing a workshop with trauma and the polyvagal theory. And that would be a whole other webinar if people are interested in the polyvagal theory, but it comes from Dr. Stephen Porges, and it talks about how horses can help you regulate from the dorsal vagal and ventral vagal, and how if we can calm our own nervous system that way, the horses can respond. And there's so many studies now. It's fascinating time to be a therapist, to work with trauma, because we're understanding much more than what you said, Nancy, that fight, flight, freeze was the old way of saying it. But the neurobiology of trauma, the way that we can understand really cool stuff, that we can repair the brain. And those neural pathways that we often thought, did you fry your nervous system with trauma? Dr. Daniel Siegel will talk about the fact that we can actually do repair, and it's the neuroplasticity of the brain. Some of those horse interactions that are available to us can help us repair. Imagine if you had, if trauma was a bruise in your brain and you went out and pet a horse, and suddenly that bruise was less bruised. I mean, that's a simple way of saying it. I'm being very, very kind of candid, or not candid, that's not the wrong word, but there's much more complicated science that goes with that. But I think that, when my clients who are dysregulated can come out and they can practice a deep breath, they can smile, they can attune to the animal, and sometimes calm them down. I will often say to my clients, you know what? If you were present for this 45 minutes with this horse and you didn't leave your body and dissociate, and the horse stayed calm because of some things you did, imagine what you can do for your own nervous system. Imagine how you can be in the world. And so we have to store that in your body. Take a picture of yourself with the horse. Know in your nervous system what this looks like, what this feels like, and how to replicate it when you're in your everyday life. And that, I can't can that as medication. I can't, but it's just amazing. So, and I'm an extrovert, and my horse at this point would come over and put his nose right on mine and say, be quiet, let's do the next thing. So, so I will take my cue from Whisper. So,
you want to talk? Yeah.
Trauma-informed treatment.
Yeah.
You're going to hear a lot about it. I think, Nancy, both you and I can say, people are saying, well, I'm trauma-informed. I'm not sure necessarily if there's a complete definition of what trauma-informed means, because there's a lot of different ways. There's eye movement desensitization reprocessing. There's sensorimotor psychotherapy. There's the polyvagal work. There's all sorts of ways to be trauma-informed. And I think what I would say about trauma-informed is, if you're going to work with this population, or if you're going to help out at a barn that's working with this population, really know what dissociation looks like and how to be able to help people. And does everybody have to be a PhD therapist and study trauma for 20 years? No. And I will say, sometimes when I'm in the barn, this work can look like concentrated orange juice through a fire hose. And it's important.
Wait, explain what you mean by that.
Well, think about what concentrated orange juice through a fire hose would look like. It's very extreme. It comes out like, and I can be, doing some stuff, and the horses will do some, they'll be like, I have a horse ghost, and he'll look at me and he go, I got this, stand over there. And he'll work with somebody, and the work happens pretty, sometimes non-verbally and things like that, but people get very in touch with feelings, with their sensations. And so you have to know how to sometimes slow it down. I call it titrate it, to be able to maybe say, okay, what's going on right now? let's take just a bite size of this. What happened with ghost? What happened in your body? And so trauma-informed work really is about understanding what you're seeing, sometimes without words, being able to attune to your horses and what's going on, and sometimes backing up clients to not have to talk about their trauma, to not relive it. I will often talk to clients about, you're going to see it as a picture on a stage or a movie. You're not going to be back in it, because we understand now that we don't want people to repeat their trauma story and their patterning, but we want people to move forward more into their ability to be, how did I get through it? What things got me here now? And how can I move forward with this horse into my new way of being in the world? So a lot of information. How about you? Trauma-informed treatment. What would you say?
So I think there are two things that are really important for me, for anybody who's going to work. This is true for therapists, but it's also true for yoga teachers or massage therapists or anybody who's going to interact with people who have been traumatized. One is how to deal with dissociation, and how to see it, how to notice it, and how to help people come back into their bodies. And that includes utilizing the breath, using the body scan, paying close attention to body sensation, bringing people back into their bodies repetitively until they're fully in. So dissociation, which is, and recognizing it when it happens, which is sometimes there's a subtle energy shift. Suddenly it feels like the person's not quite with you, not quite there. So that's one piece of it. And the other is about getting to a place of calm. And I think somebody said to me that we have become so hyperstimulated in our culture that caffeinated is the norm. And so getting to a place of slow breathing in and breathing out. People are in a hurry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. So those two things, the calm down place and the dissociation. And then I have found that the polyvagal theory is very useful, and that goes from sympathetic arousal, ventral vagal, in that, starting from that bottom to the top. So I had a client who kept getting stuck. He couldn't get his work done. He would try to work, and he would get distracted, and he would get scared, and he would be anxious, and he would be thinking about he's never going to be good enough, and all this stuff would happen, and he couldn't get to work. And so we put him in with a horse and asked him to move the horse. That was all. And he did that, and then he felt like he came into his body. I said, oh, okay. So could you do that when you're stuck in your work? And he thought about it. He said, well, I'm going to try it. So he came back the next week and he said, I tried it. It's amazing. All I had to do was get moving. So he moved from dorsal vagal to sympathetic, to fight, move. And then he was able to talk about it and get to ventral vagal, and he felt fine. He was able to work. I mean, it was like, I thought, this is just too amazing. Just from using that little diagram, he was able to do that. So I just think that the polyvagal system is really interesting. I'd love to do a webinar on that, Molly, if you want to do it sometime.
Yeah, you're setting us up for our next conversation, and maybe even bringing in Rebecca, who's the expert in that one.
Yeah.
I love it.
I want to add two things about what you said, Nancy, about dissociation. And I had a client who, for the first probably 3 months that I saw her, she was so dissociated that we would actually just she would put her hand on the horse, and we tried to get her just to feel the warmth of the horse's body and the breathing in and out. And when she could start to feel her hand, we could move to other things because she was that dissociated from her trauma. And, you know, that's not something in the office. I can't say, put your hand on mine and feel, you know, she probably it would have triggered her trauma, or excuse me, activated her trauma more. And the other piece I want to comment on is that bottom up, top down processing. Horses are bottom up processors. We are top down when we do cognitive behavioral therapy and we talk about things. We're coming from the head into the body. And when we can come from the body and move up, we're finding in our work at both Midwest Center for Trauma and Emotional Healing and Hold Your Horses that bottom up processing is much more impactful, especially for our trauma clients, because they can actually feel the changes in their body and they can notice. And when they're standing next to a horse and they're working from the bottom up, and horses will respond in really beautiful ways because they're regulating simultaneously from the body-centered perspective, which is very, very powerful. And on that note too, I will add, I have the luxury, when I work at Hold Your Horses, I work with Janet Weisberg, who's the founding director at Hold Your Horses. And we have started our own model of treatment called co-treats. I have a contract working with sexually exploited youth from the county, and we brought in occupational therapy. And lo and behold, everybody on this call probably already knows it, but when you do mental health and occupational therapy in tandem for trauma, it's amazing. It's exploded in beautiful ways. And the horses are looking at Janet and I and like, what took you so long to catch up? We've known this a long time. So I wonder if with that kind of lead in, if we should play the video, and then Nancy, you and I can kind of talk some more and then take questions.
Sure.
So I think somebody's going to play that for us because I'm not that tech savvy.
Yep, we have Deborah working on that now. She is going to be loading that video up, and stay tuned.
Well, this therapy can help sexually exploited youth because it gives kids, adults, whoever's working with the horses, an opportunity to experience things like boundaries, relationships, assertiveness in an experiential way. Often this population is a population that's disassociated from how they are in the moment, and so something will trigger them and they'll be back in a memory of a trauma or experiencing something from how I felt then. So for me to be in an office asking a question about how does that work for you in life, or can we explore boundaries, and then to put them with the horse and say, actually, you're going to use your hand, you're going to back the horse up, to have them be able to feel that where my boundaries lie, to be in my body, to be mindful and present, and then the horse actually backs up. They go, oh, I get it now. And then we can say, the horse needs you to set a boundary, because if they're not, they're going to walk and lead you. And then when it happens and the horses lead them in circles, they start laughing and going, oh, guess I'm not keeping my boundaries, or I'm not being assertive, and then they do it different. So helping them stay present and looking forward and saying how I want my life to go from now forward versus, well, I can never recover from all the things that happened to me in the past. And then experiencing that with horses when they can try things different and take on a different experience in their body, from going like being like this to actually standing straight, leading a horse, looking where they're going. They actually feel different in their body. And then I can say, okay, how is that for you? I had another experience with a young woman who we asked her to have the horse walk with her, and she stood next to the horse without a lead rope, and she kept trying to get the horse to walk, and the horse was just grounded and rooted and wouldn't move. And she crossed her arms and she goes, this is stupid, I can't do it, and walked away. And then we said, okay, how would you feel? Would you want to follow somebody if they were you and how you were in your body like this? And she said, not really. And then I said, okay, would you like to try a different way? Sure. So then I said, take a deep breath. She took a deep breath. I said, lower your shoulders. She lowered her shoulders. I said, lead instead of kind of leading from your head, lead from your heart. So she's just doing like this. The horse walked up, put her head right on her shoulder, and she said, okay, I get it. And I said, what do you get? She goes, well, in family therapy, when my mom was saying she couldn't talk to me because I was yelling and screaming and she didn't feel heard, I understand what she meant now. So that was, it's like, you know, I gave the horse lots of cookies that night. People that will walk up to me that I haven't seen in 5 years and they'll say, I don't know your name, but how's Whisper doing? And then they'll say, I remember, and their face changes and they talk about an experience where they were successful. Those memories and those experiences stay with somebody. It changes how they behave in the world, and that changes their neurology and their neural pathways. Being able to take some of the skills they learn about kindness, nurturance, mindfulness, moving forward in my life, I believe that those experiences help them to create a different awareness of themselves in the world. And if they can take some of the metaphors they gain at the barn into their life, I feel like they're going to be more productive members of society.
Molly, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. It really captures, I think, what all of us see and have been hearing from you, really the qualitative side of this, right? So a lot of the research that comes out is often very quantitative and numbers driven. And I think when we hear this and hear what both of your experiences are, we keep on going back to those stories that are, you know, so familiar of why this is working. So, you know, one of the things that we had talked a little bit about was, you know, how can research really support that? And what are you seeing as the gaps in research when we're looking at trauma? What do you guys think?
Well, I am not an academic. I'm a clinician, and but I've practiced for a long time, and I've read widely, and I've learned every new technique that's come down the pike that I could. And I think that we really need more qualitative research. I think we need more stories, and we need to get the qualitative researchers who know how to do this to look at the stories and understand what the principles are.
Really well said. How do you feel about that, Molly? We really agree. I mean, this is one of the things that HHRF is really, you know, one of the webinars that people can look up about, I think it was 2 sessions ago, was exactly this: qualitative, quantitative, applied behavioral, single case. And we had 3 fantastic presenters really discuss and debate, what rigorous really even means and what value that has, and the struggles in mental health to have numbers and data at the same time. You know, how do you measure experiences? Really good point.
And I think I would add to those when clients can say what happened and explain how the horses have impacted them, and then people can actually I didn't really understand some of the qualitative things that can happen, but people can actually start to measure when they watch somebody in the video and they look at the changes in neuromuscular systems in the face. They can watch the breathing get deeper. They can watch the shoulders drop, and they can actually, people smarter than I in research can start to put that into data. That is amazing. And I am always amazed when I do this work and ask the clients what happened there. And because sometimes I'm thinking, are they really getting anything? And then they tell me things and I'm like moved to tears. You know, I think the research that Horses and Humans Foundation is going to be doing with trauma, I'm very excited. I think there's more opportunities to measure what's happening for clients in the barn, in their neurological system now. And I think it's going to be really kind of cool stuff. So looking forward to that.
And the exciting thing is that when someone begins to heal from trauma, it has a ripple effect on everybody in their sphere. If they're a teacher, it has a ripple effect on all their students. It certainly has an effect on family members and their relationships with family members and friends, partners. And I mean, so it's really exciting to think of something positive we can do in the world at a time when there are so many challenges and people are subjected to so many different kinds of trauma.
Yeah, and I had an experience this week with a colleague. She came out and she, someone I very respect a lot and has a lot of advanced work in trauma, working with clients. And she came out and had an experience with the horses. And when I went back to the office on Wednesday, she said, "Oh, there's Molly and her magical horses." And I looked at her and I said, "What?" She said, "That was amazing. I've been telling everybody about it. I'm not sure all the voodoo that you do out there at the barn," but she goes, "I feel so much better and I get what you do now with clients, and thank you, thank you, thank you." And we were in the pasture with the horses and some things occurred for her that were pretty amazing. And she said, "Whenever I think about my old, excuse my language, BS thinking," she said, "I remember that horse who took a big poop." And she goes, "I'm reminded that stinking thinking, those automatic negative thoughts in my head," she goes, "it's just a bunch of poop." And so she now at the office, she's Molly and her amazing horses. I'm like, yeah, the horses are pretty amazing. I sometimes just have to get out of the way. So, Tara, I think you wanted us to share each a couple clinical case things and then ask for questions. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, that would be great. I think one of the questions that I'm getting some feedback on was is also you could kind of go into a little bit more of, we talked about what dissociation is for some people, we have a variety of people here from PhDs to lay people who have experienced this. So just, kind of what are they actually talking about and looking at? We don't necessarily have to get super clinical, but what does that mean? And what does it mean when you actually say somatic, when we get someone back into their body? So if you could bring me maybe a clinical case in of this a dissociation occurred, and this is what we saw and how we brought them to the horse to get back to their body. Could something like that work?
Yeah, we can actually do that. Absolutely do that. And I think I'll just say, really easy with dissociation. Dissociation is not a point on a map, and it can be along a continuum. So has anybody ever driven home and you're like, dang, how did I get here? There's a part of your body that just took over and you didn't really remember, or you got there and you're like, whoa, that was a little freaky. Or if you put your hand on a hot stove and you all of a sudden pull it back for a moment, there's an automatic response, but you left your body and it doesn't hurt for a second. And all of a sudden you look at your finger and you're like, ow. But for a moment, your body took care of you by letting you not be in that experience of pain. So those are really easy kind of ways of saying dissociation. And with complex trauma, there's a dissociative state where people can actually have different parts of their personality come up. And, in the work I do, I can talk a little about a clinical experience where I've done rescues of people going and rescuing younger parts of themselves and putting those parts of themselves with the horses for safety and things like that. But I want to hear, Nancy, what would you add about dissociation and then bringing it into a clinical example?
I think you put it very well. Dissociation happens when I have an experience which is so unbearable that I can't tolerate it. So it's a natural, normal response to an abnormal situation, and comes in degrees. And the example I would give is my own. I was laying a floor in a barn, in the upper floor of a barn, holding a 4x8 sheet of plywood and balancing on a beam. And the next thing I knew, I was on the floor 14 feet below with a broken leg. And so I was about 5 years out of medical school at the time. I was about 10 feet above my body, giving orders. I was giving orders. Get a blanket, do this, do that, call the ambulance. And I wasn't in my body. It was the strangest sensation. And then, of course, in the ambulance, once they gave me some morphine, I came back. It feels like coming back into your body. Now, that's a pretty dramatic example. I think what we mean by in your body means fully aware of my body sensation in the, I'm fully present in the moment. I'm not worrying about the future. I'm not thinking about the past. Fully present in the moment, which is a physical, which is really, we're talking about bottom up. The bottom is the afferent nerves. That is the nervous system that brings information to the heart, the gut, and the brain from the rest of the body. And so it's that the sensation, body sensation is the bedrock where we live. It's what feeds emotion. It's what feeds thought. It's what feeds state. I can't think of the right words. It's what gives us a sense of well-being or unwellness. So getting back into body sensation, that's what I mean by it.
Yeah, and I would
really
add,
helpful. Yeah, I think that answers it for a lot of people.
I'm sorry? Say again?
go ahead, Karen.
I was going to say thank you both so much. I mean, that really clarifies it, on two different levels. One of, what is that continuum, right? People ask a lot of times, does trauma have degrees, or, why is it vogue now? And what are we really even, more aware of trauma? One of the things that we were talking about as we were, meeting earlier this week was kind of the collective trauma that so many people have been in, and specifically with the pandemic. Specifically with trauma, we see a lot of people isolate, right? We didn't talk a little about that much. And so when they come out to the horses and they're getting back in their body and they're part of a herd, but the pandemic said isolate. So, it's this strange, we're supposed to isolate, but we're not. And when people have trauma, are you seeing or noticing that the reentry is difficult for people? What kind of impact do you think that had in the industry and for people with trauma?
I do think people have a harder time re-entering. We were able to keep sessions going because we got the horses used to telehealth and Zoom, and they were on the screen. What I'm finding too about that collective trauma is being able to offer, like, first responders and people who've been out in the work world and trying to help people is compassion fatigue work, and really letting them slowly come back. People, you asked about somatics. It's like to feel your body again a little bit at a time, and to come into some experiences of, when I'm out and I'm really nervous now when I'm out with a bunch of people. Well, of course, that would make sense. And when I say somatically, what's the sense of the nervousness? And people look at me and go, what do you mean? I'm like, is there a pushing in your belly? Is there a tickle in your throat? Is there, really understanding and noticing their bodies so that they can respond. And if they have that kind of tickle in their tummy, they can take a deep breath, or they can, eat a mint, things like that. And they can go out in the barn and be with the horses to feel better a little bit at a time. And again, slowly reintegrating. And I think the barn is a beautiful place to slowly, when you're tired of people because you haven't been around them and it's too much, go out in the barn and hang out with the horses. And I guarantee, well, I can't guarantee it with the research perspective, but my body tells me I feel better. And that's enough research for me that says I can bring that to my clients.
Right.
So
do we have some questions from?
We do have one question from Jean, and it said, Nancy, we need more research. How do we accomplish that? That's a great question. And that is the entire mission of HHRF. So you're in the right place. Nancy, you have an answer for us. Tough one.
How do we get more? How do we do more research? How do we get more?
Yeah, how do we accomplish this in this, the ambiguity of what we do, yet we need to have the data driven of, heart rate variability or, cortisol levels. At the same time, what we're saying is how do we get those stories? I think, Jean, is that the question that you were asking?
Well, one way is that we keep telling the truth as we experience it. I met Bessel van der Kolk before anybody knew who he was. He was a really nice guy, a nice a compassionate psychiatrist, which is unusual enough. And he was also incredibly stubborn. He said, I have been noticing that when we do EMDR on trauma patients, and this was like 25 years ago, their brain scans change, their PET scans change. We can see in the brain that therapy changes something. And then he said, you know, yoga seems to do the same thing. He didn't know anything about horses at the time. But he just, and people thought he was nuts. Everybody thought, oh, he's just a kook. You know, what's all this trauma stuff about? He was interested in people who had what was then called multiple personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, people with complex trauma. And he just kept on doing it and kept on teaching about it and kept on talking about it. And now he's, you know, now he's highly respected in the field. So I think what we need to do is keep on doing what we do and teach about it and learn about it. And I would give a plug to anybody who's interested in doing research, to do some writing. I mean, that's the other thing. People like Linda Kohanoff have done enormous good in the field by just doing, researching what's been done and writing about it and encouraging other people to do that.
So Nancy, I'll add to what you're saying too, is that Bessel now incorporates horses in some of his work. So
Yes,
you
he
did a good job.
Yeah. He's right there in Boston. A great book for everybody to read. Bessel's most famous book, or one of them, it's called The Body Keeps the Score. So that's a great one. If anybody who's watching, is kind of looking on how to look up Bessel. He does a ton of conferences, some really terrific informative stuff. So they do have some resources here available. Nancy and Molly, maybe we open this up to some questions, or would you like to talk about the resources that are available that you listed here?
I think if there's more questions, people can ask, and I'll just say a little on the resources page, we just put together some of the stuff that we knew about. There is more opportunities now for people to go and actually go to university settings and get some training. There's different programs out there for you to take classes from, or certification courses. Horses and Humans Foundation are going to continue to do more research so that there can be more opportunities for more training for people. And I would add on the resources page, both Nancy and I offer consultation for people who want to learn more about this work or learn more about trauma. And you can connect with either of us and ask questions. If there's something that tripped you up here, or that you don't want to ask in the full view of everybody, you can reach out to us through our emails or our phone numbers, and we'll be happy to be helpful in any way. And for those of you that have that ability to do research, do it. We really need it for trauma. I will just say it was really fun to work on this with Nancy, and I was able to stay in my adult awareness the whole time, Nancy, and I appreciate that, because just looking at your face on the screen, I got a little more regulated, and none of my little kids kind of came out and got too scared or nervous, and I didn't freeze. So I appreciate that. And I so appreciate all the work of the Horses and Humans Foundation, because Tara, you made this presentation look awesome, and the people that helped, and Pebbles, your coaching on this. So thank you. We need some funding to keep the research going, and
we need lots of funding. We need lots of funding. We need people to really put money behind research, and the Horses and Humans Foundation is an incredible agency of really hardworking, dedicated people who are trying to help fund research. So if you can, anything you can contribute, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be a lot. Anything you can contribute, we really appreciate it. And there's a way to contribute. How do we do that, Tara?
There's
do
a
people-
donate button. Oh, Deborah's so good. She see, that was not me. I can't take any credit for that. That's everybody in the back. Andrea Suck and Deborah and Pebbles. So it's an incredible team. You're absolutely right. And you know, all of these conversations that we have with the education committee and the board, you're right. It's such an exciting time. You know, to really think, you know, there's been a door for music therapy or for mindfulness based stress reduction, and I think in this industry, you guys, we're the next door. So let's keep pushing, let's keep banging it down, because what you're seeing is everyone around us has those stories of this is working. So the word is out there. Now we just need to really get the support so that, you know, it's reimbursable by insurance, or, you know, doctors and others will really support that. So, well, it is reimbursable, but it can be challenging for people. So, you know, I think it's really exciting also that the next webinar, I'm going to do a little plug for that next one, is we are having Dr. Prudence Fisher, who just did the Man of War project. She's with Columbia, and it was a 4-year-long project that they did to be able to measure with fMRIs pre and post. So they worked with veterans with trauma, and there were, I think, about 8 or 9 different sites. Do you guys know the exact number? I think it was 8 or 9 or so, pairs of mental health and equine specialists across the country. And they measured the differences. So the structure of the brain actually changed. So exactly what Nancy and Molly are talking about here, of as we're in the fields with people, know that that is making a difference. So keep up with the boots on the ground, and you know, keep getting more informed and involved. Nancy and Molly, do you guys have any good suggestions of ways for people to network or learn more about what you were talking about tonight, specifically with, you know, the polyvagal, or any good ones that you could refer us to?
No, I think the polyvagal theory, you can look it up and read some stuff online. If you're interested in the somatic work, sensorimotor psychotherapy, you can look that up. There, an institution out of and a training program out of Colorado. I think if you have any questions on any of the resources we put up, you can absolutely look to that. And I think one of the resources that we all have is the horses. And so if you go in the barn and you experience your own understanding about what's happening in my nervous system, how does my body feel when I'm standing next to the horse? What happens if they run? Do I get a little, and then I go back to grazing? So that's a really good resource. And Nancy, I would turn it over.
You broke up, Molly. I didn't hear what you said, but
Oh, I said, I'm just turning it over to you if you have some other thoughts.
no, but I also wanted to say, please, I mean, I would welcome, and I think I speak for Molly too, we really welcome if you have questions or you have interests, you know, call us or email us or let us know. We want to hear from you.
Thank you both so much for making yourselves available. This was really exciting. I scribbled down notes and notes and notes, and really, really enjoyed it. And you're right, there's more to be done, but there has been so much already. So certainly keep following us on HHRF and watch the YouTubes, and, you know, come on down to North Carolina to the conference. I'm sure we'll have a good time. So please stay involved, and thank you all so much. You're just seeing such great feedback here from everybody. Nancy and Molly, can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you, Carol.
Blessings, everybody. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.